The bell above the glass doors chimed softly. Metro Prime Bank, downtown Manhattan, marble floors gleaming under fluorescent lights, polished counters, a faint smell of fresh coffee and printer ink. It was a Monday morning, busy, but not chaotic. Business as usual. Danielle Brooks stepped inside, confident, calm, invisible to most. She wore dark jeans, a navy blazer, simple gold earrings, no flashy jewelry, no entourage. No name tag screaming CEO, just her, and a quiet kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. She walked up to the counter. The teller, a young woman with tight bun and tired eyes, looked up, gave a mechanical smile. "Next, please." Danielle stepped forward. "Good morning," she said, voice smooth. "I'd like to make a withdrawal." She slid her Metro Prime card across the counter and a slip of paper. The amount? High, very high. Not suspiciously so, but enough to turn heads in the wrong hands. The teller glanced at the number, frowned, cleared her throat. I'll need your ID, ma'am." Danielle smiled warmly. "Of course." She handed over 2 forms of ID, both current, both clean, passport, driver's license. The teller's frown deepened, brows knitted, a small hesitation, barely a pause, but Danielle caught it because she's seen that pause before, the one that says, "You don't look like someone who should have that much money." The teller didn't move, just stared at the documents. Then, without a word, she whispered to a man behind the counter. Middle-aged, white, gray suit, manager badge gleaming, Greg Stanton, branch manager, big boss of this little kingdom. Greg approached, broad. Steps, chin up, smile tight, not friendly, condescending. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "I'm Greg, the branch manager. Can I ask what brings you in today?" Danielle blinked once, slow, then smiled again. "Just a withdrawal, nothing unusual." Greg chuckled dryly. Right. Of course." He picked up her card, flipped it between his fingers like it offended him. "You understand," he said, voice lowering. "We can't just approve large cash withdrawals without extra steps." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "And what steps would those be?" Greg shrugged. "Additional verification. Maybe come back another day." Danielle tilted her head slightly, calm, controlled. "I have my ID, my account, my authorization." "What exactly is missing?" Greg didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because the look in his eyes said everything. Other customers shifted nearby, watching now, feeling the tension sharpen. But no one spoke. Because when a black woman asks for what is already hers, the room often forgets how to breathe. Danielle slid her phone from her pocket, not frantic, not defensive, just ready. "Perhaps," she said softly, "you should double-check who you're speaking to." Greg smirked, dismissive, arrogant. "Maybe you should take your business somewhere else. Somewhere you're more comfortable." The words hung there. Ugly. Heavy. Final. Danielle smiled again. But this time, there was steel behind it, a glint in her eye that said Greg Stanton had just made a mistake he couldn't buy his way out of. Not today. Not with her. She typed a short message on her phone, pressed send, slipped it back into her blazer pocket and said, "Just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I understand. I won't be long." Then she stepped back, leaned casually against the counter, folded her arms, and waited. Because Danielle Brooks didn't need to raise her voice to change the temperature of the room. She just needed 7 minutes. Before the marble floors, before the whispered suspicion, before the smirk from a man who thought he held all the cards. There was a girl. Southside Chicago. Small apartment. Shared walls thin enough to hear arguments next door. Danielle Brooks. Grew up with hunger. Not just the kind that gnawed at your stomach, but the kind that gnawed at your future. Her mother Janice worked 2 jobs. Day shift, receptionist. Night shift, cleaning offices that smelled of leather and power. Danielle would wait up sometimes, doing homework at the kitchen table, watching the clock, waiting for the soft click of keys in the door, waiting for the quiet, tired smile her mother wore like a badge. From her mother, Danielle learned early. Respect yourself first. The world will catch up later. At school, she wasn't the loudest. She wasn't the most popular, but she was unstoppable. Straight A's, debate team champion, mathlete medals tucked under a wobbly nightstand. When other kids laughed at her ambition, she just smiled, because she knew. Dreams are louder than doubts if you listen closely enough. Scholarships rained down senior year, not because anyone handed them to her, but because she earned them, letter by letter, page by page, test by grueling test. She chose Wharton Business School, not because it was easy, because it was a proving ground. There she learned to sit in rooms where she wasn't wanted, rooms where people assumed she was a secretary, rooms where her ideas got nodded at only when someone else repeated them, rooms where diversity was a buzzword, not a practice. She didn't complain. She studied harder, smarter, sharper. By 28, Danielle had climbed into upper management at a major bank. By 35, she was running departments. By 40, she was sitting in the CEO's chair at Metro Prime Financial Holdings, the same institution whose downtown branch now treated her like a stranger at her own table. Danielle knew about walls. She had seen them all her life, some made of brick, some made of bias. She didn't waste her energy trying to knock them down with anger. She simply walked through them. Quiet, unstoppable, inevitable. That's why today, standing there in her simple blazer and jeans, waiting while a branch manager made assumptions about who she was, Danielle didn't flinch, didn't snap, didn't defend, because she understood something they didn't. Power isn't in proving. Power is in knowing. And Danielle Brooks? She knew exactly who she was, exactly where she stood, and exactly how long it would take for the rest of the room to figure it out. The clock behind the teller ticked. 1 minute down, 6 minutes to go. Patience wasn't just a virtue for Danielle. It was her weapon, sharp, silent, lethal. The lobby of Metro Prime buzzed with soft conversations. Fingers drummed on marble counters. Printers whirred in the distance. The faint scent of brewed coffee floated from the staff room. And in the middle of it all, Danielle Brooks waited. Still, steady, patient. Greg. Stanton leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes narrowed, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Because in his mind, this woman was wasting his time. He turned to the teller, speaking just loud enough for Danielle to hear. I don't know why some people expect special treatment. The teller tensed, shifted awkwardly, but said nothing. Greg picked up Danielle's ID again, flipped it between his fingers like it was some cheap playing card. Danielle Brooks, he read aloud, voice dripping with sarcasm. Big name, big request. He chuckled, low, dismissive. Danielle's expression didn't change. Not a flicker, not a wince. Greg leaned closer over the counter. Maybe you can explain how someone like you manages an account like this. Or maybe you can take your business somewhere more appropriate. The words hung in the air, heavy, poisonous. Customers nearby shifted. One or two glanced over. An elderly man in a tweed coat frowned. A young Latina woman paused her check deposit mid-sentence. They could feel it now, the wrongness sharpening in the room. Danielle smiled, slow, measured, deadly. Is that official bank policy, Mr. Stanton? Greg scoffed, waved. A dismissive hand. It is when I say so. He turned to walk away, a casual flick of his wrist like shooing a nuisance, like erasing a question he didn't feel like answering. Danielle stayed where she was. Didn't chase him. Didn't raise her voice. because she knew something he didn't. You don't have to chase small minds. You just let them run into the wall they built themselves. Behind the counter, the teller bit her lip, regret flashing across her face, but it was too late for warnings, too late for whispered advice. The wheels were already in motion. Danielle pulled. Her phone from her blazer pocket again, checked the time. 4 minutes down, 3 minutes to go. Greg barked orders at another employee across the lobby, completely unaware, utterly convinced that he had won, that the woman standing at the counter, with patience in her eyes and a storm in her silence, was nobody. And in that belief, he sealed his own fate. Danielle tucked her phone away, folded her arms loosely across her chest, exhaled slowly. Because now, it wasn't a matter of if Greg Stanton would realize his mistake. It was only a matter of when, and that moment was coming faster than he could imagine. The lobby grew quieter, subtly, like a string being pulled tighter, tighter, waiting to snap. A few customers paused their transactions. Some leaned slightly on their toes, pretending to fiddle with paperwork, but really, they were watching. Danielle still stood by the counter, unmoved, arms folded, face serene. Greg Stanton paced nearby, hands on hips, muttering into his phone, arrogant, oblivious, still thinking he controlled the room, still thinking he controlled her. At the far end of the lobby, a man in a tailored suit glanced up from his tablet, frowned, pulled out his own phone quietly, because something about this scene felt wrong, familiar, and too familiar was dangerous. The teller wiped her palms on her skirt under the counter, heart pounding, because she knew. This wasn't just a customer. This wasn't just another Monday. Near the deposit slips, an elderly man lowered his newspaper. He stared at Danielle's face. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Slow, building. His mouth opened, then closed again, uncertain whether to speak, uncertain if it could even make a difference now. Danielle checked. The time again, 2 minutes, just 2 more. She tapped her thumb lightly against the counter, not impatient, calculated. Because Danielle Brooks understood something the others didn't. You don't teach a lesson by shouting. You teach it by letting arrogance perform its own downfall. At the center of the lobby, Greg's voice rose again. If you're still here when I get back, I'm calling the police. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, a deliberate escalation, the final nail in his own coffin. The crowd stiffened. No one laughed now, no one chuckled, no one whispered, because even if they didn't know who she was, they could feel it. The wrongness, the injustice, the storm gathering at the edges of the room. Danielle smiled, a small, private thing, because Greg didn't realize the police weren't coming for her. The executives were coming for him. Outside, through the glass doors, black SUVs pulled up to the curb, sleek, dark-tinted, silent. A corporate convoy moving with quiet precision. Greg didn't notice. Too busy patting himself on the back, too busy mistaking silence for submission. Inside the first SUV, a tall woman in a sharp gray suit stepped out. Metro Prime Financial's regional VP. Another figure exited behind her. The director of operations, and then the executive vice president. They moved like a storm front, purposeful, directed, straight, toward the glass doors, straight toward Greg Stanton. Inside the lobby, a ripple went through the crowd. Phones came up, cameras switched to video, because they didn't know exactly what was happening yet, but they knew they were about to witness something worth remembering. Danielle unfolded her arms, smoothed the front of her blazer, and turned slightly. Just enough to face the approaching storm she had summoned. Greg finally noticed the shift in the room, turned, frowned at the black-clad group striding through the doors, confused, then annoyed, then worried. The regional VP didn't slow down. She locked eyes with Danielle, nodded once. Sharp, respectful, acknowledging power when she saw it. Danielle nodded back, just slightly. Because when you're the real authority, you don't have to announce it. You just stand still and let the world catch up. The glass doors swung open. The Metro Prime executive team entered. Swift, sharp, silent. No wasted movement. No unnecessary words, just presence. And presence spoke louder than any announcement ever could. Greg Stanton straightened his tie, confused, uncomfortable. But still clinging to his arrogance like a sinking man clinging to driftwood. He stepped forward, forcing a grin onto his face. "Good morning, folks. How can I assist you?" His voice cracked at the end, betraying him. The regional VP didn't slow, didn't stop, walked right past him, straight to Danielle Brooks. She extended her hand, professional, respectful. "Ms. Brooks," she said, voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "I apologize for this unacceptable treatment." Gasps rippled through the lobby, small, sharp, eyes widened, phones tilted higher. Danielle shook the VP's hand once, firm, cool, then turned her gaze to Greg. Measured, deadly. Greg's smile faltered, collapsed. He looked from Danielle to the VP, to the director of operations, to the cluster of executives flanking her like an honor guard. "Wait, what's going on?" His voice shrank, tinny, small. A far cry from the man who had just threatened to call the police. The regional VP turned slightly toward him, her words clipped, precise, final. "Greg Stanton, meet Ms. Danielle Brooks, founder and chief executive, officer of Metro Prime Financial Holdings, the corporation that owns this branch." Silence. Not the awkward kind, the devastating kind. The kind that sucks the air out of a room and leaves nothing but exposed regret. Greg blinked, mouth opening, closing, no words coming out. Because what can you say when you realize you didn't just disrespect a customer? You disrespected your boss's boss's boss? Danielle stepped forward now, only one step, enough to reclaim the space, enough to make every eye in the lobby snap to attention. She didn't yell, didn't raise a hand, didn't even frown. She just said, "Greg Stanton, as of this moment, your employment with Metro Prime is terminated." Gasps again, a collective exhale, and then cameras flashed, phones vibrated, whispers surged like a tide around them. Greg's face flushed deep red, then pale white. He stammered, "Whoa, wait, you can't." Danielle held up a hand. Calm, regal, a queen. Dismissing noise. "I can." And I just did. The regional VP nodded toward security. Two suited guards approached. Firm, but not rough. Professional. They guided Greg toward the exit. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. Because there was nothing left to say. As Greg disappeared through the doors, the lobby seemed to breathe again. People straightened, murmured, smiled. Danielle turned back to the teller, the young woman who had hesitated, who had doubted. Danielle offered a small smile. Not cruel, not vengeful, just real. "Learn their names," she said softly. "Learn their faces. Learn their worth before you assume." The teller nodded quickly, eyes brimming with understanding. Danielle looked around the room, at the faces who had watched, judged, then learned. And with a final calm nod, she tucked her phone back into her blazer and walked toward the conference room with the executives trailing respectfully behind her. Because true power, it doesn't scream. It simply walks in and rewrites the room without permission. The conference room door closed behind Danielle. Frosted glass muted the noise from the lobby, but not the weight of what had just happened. Inside, the air was different, charged, focused, waiting. The regional VP, the director of operations, and a handful of top executives took their seats quickly, Not casually, respectfully, because in this room, there were no assumptions left, only reality. Danielle stood at the head of the table, didn't sit, didn't unpack a laptop, didn't pull out a stack of prepared notes. She didn't need props, she was the message. She placed her palms lightly on the polished wood table, leaned in slightly, and spoke. Voice low, measured, undeniable. What happened out there is not a mistake. It's a symptom. No one interrupted. No one shifted uncomfortably. They knew better. Danielle continued. A symptom of a culture that tolerates assumption. A culture that mistakes arrogance for authority. And if we don't treat the disease, we will lose more than just customers. We will lose the very soul of this institution. The words hung heavy over the boardroom. The director of operations cleared his throat softly. Ms. Brooks, what do you propose? Danielle straightened, her eyes locked onto each executive one by one, pinning them in place with nothing but truth. Effective immediately, she said. We are implementing mandatory anti-bias training at every branch. Not a 1-hour PowerPoint. Real workshops. Real accountability. She glanced at the HR director. We will establish anonymous feedback. Channels where employees and customers can report incidents. Not to the branch managers. To a central ethics board, independent of day-to-day management. The regional VP leaned forward, nodded, already taking notes, already seeing where the tide was going. Danielle wasn't finished. Not yet. Every branch manager will undergo quarterly evaluations, not just on sales, but on leadership behavior, on cultural competency, on respect. Someone at the table shifted. Nervous, Danielle caught it, pressed harder. And let me be clear, promotions will no longer be based solely on performance metrics. They will be based on how well you lead human beings. Not just numbers on a screen, the director of operations scribbled frantically. The regional VP smiled, small but real, because deep down, they all knew. This wasn't just good ethics, it was good business. Danielle leaned back slightly now, letting the weight of her words settle. Metro Prime doesn't just move money. We move trust. And trust, she said, once broken, is a currency you can never get back. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was alignment. It was consensus. It was the unmistakable sense that the room was changing. The regional VP finally spoke. Consider it done, Ms. Brooks. Across all regions, Danielle smiled. Small, sincere, not victorious, purposeful, because this wasn't about winning a fight in one branch. This was about changing the standard across the entire empire. Outside the frosted glass, the lobby buzzed with new energy. The customers still whispered about the woman who had walked in alone and left with the whole system standing at attention. Inside, Danielle gathered her things. Finally. Ready to leave. Because when the groundwork is solid, you don't need to hover. You trust it will hold. She paused at the door, looked back once, and said, next time someone like me walks through those doors, make sure the only thing you see is a customer. She pushed the door open, stepped into the golden afternoon light, and disappeared into the city, a force far bigger than any building she left behind. The story didn't stay inside Metro Prime's downtown branch. It leaked. First, a few blurry cell phone videos on Twitter, then posts on LinkedIn, then headlines. Fast, relentless, inevitable. Black CEO fired bank manager after being denied service. At her own branch. Danielle Brooks teaches the corporate world a lesson in respect. Banking. While black, until you own the bank. By noon, the video had 1 million views. By evening, 10 million. Talk shows picked it up. Morning news anchors replayed the footage, Danielle Brooks standing tall, calm, while Greg Stanton crumbled. The contrast was too sharp to ignore, too perfect. Pundits debated. Some called her an icon. Some tried to spin it as an overreaction. But most people saw it for what it was. A mirror held up to a broken system, and the reflection wasn't pretty. Danielle stayed silent that first day. No press conference, no viral Twitter thread, no emotional posts, because she knew. Sometimes the smartest thing you can say is nothing at all. But the public? They spoke for her. Loudly. Hashtags trended. Banking while black shall respect as currency. Danielle Brooks affect employees from other branches anonymously posted their own stories. Customers flooded review sites with demands for change. Local politicians weighed in. Major corporations scrambled to review their own internal policies. Because Danielle hadn't just fired a branch manager, she had fired a warning shot across the entire corporate world. Respect is no longer optional. It's non-negotiable. 3 days after the incident, Danielle finally released a simple, elegant statement. I did not set out to go viral. I did not act out of anger. I acted out of principle. Because every customer deserves dignity. Because every employee deserves accountability. Because leadership isn't about who you stand over. It's about who you stand up for. The statement spread faster than the original video, screenshots, billboards, conference stages. Everyone wanted to quote her, because in less than a week, Danielle Brooks had gone from CEO to symbol, not for being loud, not for being flashy, but for being unshakably right when it mattered most. Inside Metro Prime's corporate headquarters, the walls shifted too. Executive meetings buzzed with urgency. Bias audits were fast-tracked. Customer service models were rewritten. Because now, every branch manager, every teller, every employee knew the woman you ignore today might own the building you work in tomorrow. Danielle didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply went back to work, building, changing, leading, because she understood something most people forget. Real accountability isn't about winning one day. It's about changing what tomorrow looks like. And Danielle Brooks? She had just changed a lot of tomorrows. By the end of the week, Danielle Brooks's name was everywhere. Headlines, podcasts, business forums. But inside her corner office overlooking Manhattan, Danielle wasn't basking. She was building. Emails poured in, requests for interviews, invitations to panels, proposals for book deals and speaking tours. Danielle declined most of them because she wasn't interested in telling her story over and over. She was interested in changing the story for others. In the quiet of her office, she drafted something new, a letter, not a press release, not a PR move, a real letter addressed to every branch, every employee, every customer of Metro Prime. It opened with one line: respect is not a reward for status. It is the baseline for humanity. The letter was direct, personal, uncompromising. Danielle outlined the new standards: mandatory empathy and bias training for all employees, anonymous reporting systems directly monitored by the executive board, new hiring guidelines, prioritizing community leadership and cultural intelligence, not just sales numbers, quarterly public accountability reports for transparency. She didn't sugarcoat it, didn't frame it as nice to have. She called it non-negotiable, because dignity isn't a perk, it's a promise. She ended the letter with a final note: to those who already practice respect, thank you for building this future with me. To those who resist it, find another place to work. The letter went viral within the company and then beyond it. LinkedIn feeds exploded. Business schools added her letter to case studies overnight. Major news outlets called it the Danielle Brooks Standard. But Danielle didn't stop there. She launched a scholarship fund, the Respect Matters Fellowship, focused on young leaders from underrepresented communities who wanted to work in finance, but didn't see anyone who looked like them at the top. She organized community forums, invited customers, and employees alike to share their experiences, their fears, their hopes for what banking could be if respect led the way. At every event, Danielle repeated one simple truth. Power isn't what you hold over people. Power is how you hold space for people. And slowly, Metro Prime changed. The culture shifted. Not perfectly, not overnight, but permanently. In lobbies across the country, tellers stood a little straighter, smiled a little wider, asked questions with real curiosity instead of suspicion. Because now, they understood. Every face that walks through the door is a face deserving of dignity. Period. Danielle's phone buzzed one evening, a message from a young black woman working at a small branch in Houston. It read, "Today, a little girl saw me behind the counter and asked if she could be a banker someday. I told her she could be whatever she wanted. Thank you for making space for her dreams." Danielle stared at the screen, let the tears sting her eyes, smiled. Because this was the real victory. Not the headlines, not the hashtags, but the ripples, the thousands of unseen moments where someone chooses respect over assumption, kindness over suspicion, dignity over arrogance. Because real change isn't measured by how loud the world claps when you win. It's measured by how differently they treat the next person who looks like you. And Danielle Brooks, she wasn't just changing a bank. She was changing the way the world calculates worth. Change rarely starts with fireworks. Most of the time, it begins with a whisper, a shift, a ripple. 1 month after the incident, things started happening that no one had planned for. Not Danielle, not Metro Prime, not the media. Other banks noticed, quietly, carefully. They rolled out their own anti-bias initiatives. They rewrote internal policies, launched new customer service pledges. Not because they suddenly grew a conscience, but because silence had become more expensive than change. Human resource departments updated their training manuals. Workshops on unconscious bias tripled in attendance. Corporations, financial, and beyond hosted panels titled "Respect is Good Business." Danielle's name was quietly cited in boardrooms, not for scandal, for setting a new bar, a bar no company could afford to ignore. But the ripple didn't stop at banking. At universities, business professors added her case study to ethics courses. At law firms, young associates of color passed around screenshots of Danielle's letter like battle flags. At tech companies, diversity and inclusion teams pointed to Metro Prime's reforms as proof that systemic change wasn't impossible, just uncomfortable, just inconvenient for those who benefited from pretending otherwise, and in smaller, quieter ways. Danielle's impact showed up in coffee shops, in airports, in grocery stores. Every time a young black woman in casual clothes got better service. Every time a man in a hoodie wasn't followed around a store. Every time someone asked before assuming, the ripple grew. Danielle knew she hadn't fixed everything. She knew systems older than her grandmother still lurked, still resisted, but she also knew a crack is all you need for the light to start pouring in. One afternoon, she sat at a cafe, sipping coffee, reviewing quarterly reports. A stranger approached, nervous, young, holding a Metro Prime debit card between 2 fingers like a peace offering. "Excuse me," the girl said. "I just wanted to say, thank you." Danielle smiled gently. "For what?" The girl blushed. "For making it easier for girls like me to walk into a bank and be seen." Danielle's throat tightened, not with sadness, with something heavier, something sacred. Because that was the real currency, the true return on investment, changing how people are allowed to exist. Later that night, Danielle wrote 3 words in her journal. Quiet victories matter. She closed the notebook, turned off her phone, and went to sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges, new walls to climb, new whispers to turn into roars. But tonight, she rested in the knowledge that ripples, once set in motion, never stop moving forward. The world moved on as it always does. New scandals, new heroes, new hashtags. The headlines shifted. The cameras looked elsewhere. But the ripples Danielle Brooks had set in motion, they never stopped. Weeks turned into months. The scholarship fund she created, the Respect Matters Fellowship, grew faster than anyone expected. Applications poured in, not just from future bankers, from future lawyers, entrepreneurs, community leaders. Danielle read every single essay submitted, every hope, every story, every dream scrawled in shaky handwriting or typed late at night in libraries and dorm rooms. Common threads wove through them all. Thank you for showing me someone who looks like me could lead. Thank you for proving we belong, even when they act like we don't. Thank you for staying calm when the world expected you to explode. And Danielle smiled, because she realized the real revolution doesn't happen with a marching band and fireworks. It happens in a bank lobby, in a whispered conversation, in the quiet confidence of a girl walking into her first interview unafraid. At Metro Prime, the culture had shifted permanently. New posters lined the walls. Respect, our only policy. Training sessions opened with Danielle's story. New employees spoke her name with reverence, not because she demanded it, because she had earned it. One crisp Saturday morning, Danielle walked into a neighborhood branch, just to check on things. Just to see. A young teller smiled as she approached, warm, genuine. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome to Metro Prime. How can I assist you today?" No hesitation, no suspicion, no assumptions. Danielle smiled back, small, quiet, powerful. "I'm just here," she said, "to see how far we've come." As she turned to leave, a little girl tugged at her mother's hand near the brochure stand, whispered, too loud to ignore. "Mommy, look. She's the lady who changed the bank." Danielle chuckled softly, knelt down, looked the girl in the eye. "Not just the bank, sweetheart. We're changing the whole world." The girl's eyes lit up. Danielle stood, gave the mother a gentle nod, and walked back into the sunlight. No fanfare, no applause. Just footprints on the pavement, and a trail of doors flung open behind her. Doors once closed by doubt, by bias, by fear, now swinging freely for whoever dared to walk through them. Because true legacy isn't loud, it's living proof that you don't have to shout to move mountains. Sometimes you just have to stand still, smile, and be undeniable. The end.